I'm Todd Jones, recovering from 30 years as a sports writer. Thanks for joining me as I sit down with some of the best sports writers of our time, who knew the greatest athletes and coaches and experienced firsthand some of the biggest sports moments of the past half century. We'll share stories behind the stories, some we've only told each other. Pull up a seat on Pressbox Access. Mary Schmidt Boyer once thought she was going to be a nurse, and then she tried sports writing in college. She got the bug, stuck with it. We're all better off because of that. Fans benefited from Mary's in-depth coverage, especially of the NBA. She helped pave the way for other women in sports journalism. And all scribes learned from Mary's knowledge and professionalism. I know I did. You can't go wrong by hanging out with Mary. Hey, Mary, it's you. It's really you, Mary. Thanks so much for joining us on Pressbox Access.
I am so honored to be among your many distinguished guests.
Well, I don't know about honored. That's a big word.
Okay, it was free today.
That's right. It's free. That's how we pay here. But I am really thrilled to be talking with you again. We got to know each other a lot during the 18 years you spent at the Plain Dealer in Cleveland from 96 to 2014. I always enjoyed covering sporting events with you, Mary. You're a pro's pro. You brought wisdom and a calming influence to an often chaotic atmosphere.
Well, thank you, although people might think that's a high bar. They've never been in a press room, so.
Yeah, you always seem to be there when I needed some calming words. So thank you, Mary.
You're more than welcome.
Mary, you were well known for NBA and Olympic coverage, but you covered a lot during your nearly 40 years at newspapers in Cleveland, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Kansas City. You're Eugene, Oregon. Now looking back, when you think about it, what was it like to be a sports writer?
It was a hell of a lot of fun, I would have to say. Overall, people say, do you miss it? I retired from the Plain Dealer in 2014. A lot of people say, do you miss it? And I would say no, because I don't miss waiting for LeBron to come out and talk to us, or for practice to start when the Cavs told it, or to end when they told us it was going to end.
Right.
But it was a lot. It was a lot of fun. I never expected to travel the world the way I did. I certainly, that was kind of a big bonus for me. I think whenever I would talk to students, I would say, here's something I never thought of, but that you should, when they used to want to be sports writers, when there were newspapers and things. Here's another thing you might want to think about, but that was kind of a bonus. I think we all got to be a little bit of experts at traveling and finding that Marriott in the most remote corner of, wherever, but it was just a hell of a lot of fun. A lot of work. I mean, very irregular hours. Phone was ringing toward the end when, after Twitter. Right. We could talk about Twitter if you want. Your phone would ring at all hours of the day and night.
It was like being a firefighter, right? Yeah.
A little bit.
Dinner plans, forget it. There go dinner plans.
Right. I would, you try to go golfing. The thing was the computer was in the back of the cart. But it was fun while it lasted, I have to say.
When you think about it, do you have a favorite moment, an anecdote, a story about the business itself that you think about when you think about sports writers?
Boy, that is a very good question. I can tell you one of my proudest moments was my last day was the 2014 NBA draft. Mm-hmm. And I actually, Woj, and it's impossible to beat Woj on anything on the NBA draft, right?
Right, the great Adrian Wojnarowski, right?
I beat him that night.
On your final day.
Yeah. My boss, Mike Starkey, was delirious. And actually, it was the Cavs had the first pick and took Wiggins versus, I think Jabari Parker was the other guy they were rumored to be interested in. And other sports writers were coming to give me high fives because nobody beat him. And even Woj later on said, congratulations. So,
of course he did, because Woj is such a great guy that...
Yeah, he had the other 29 picks, and so, give me one. Just give me one.
He'll give you one. Come on.
So that was a very proud moment.
Great way to go
think,
out, right?
Yeah, I think people don't have any idea how hard we worked. I think, even in our own newspapers, it was kind of called the fun and games department. I worked for Bill Dwyer, who went to the, I worked for him at the Milwaukee Journal. He went to the LA Times and became a rock star. And, he always called it the toy department, or said people called it the toy department. So I don't think people had any idea of some of the difficulties and even the trap when you, not just the work, the amount of work, but when you figure in the traveling, I've sent stories from phone booths in my pajamas, back when you used to have a computer that you put the phone in.
Couplers.
So from phone booths in my pajamas, all kinds of crazy. They sent me, the PD sent me to, remember Roethlisberger's motorcycle crash?
Yes.
So they sent me, first of all, I get lost driving in Pittsburgh no matter what. I just get lost. And they're kind of dictating to me over the phone where I was going. I didn't have GPS. I don't know, whatever. But so, and then I sent that story sitting on a curb in front of the hospital. It was, you just figured out a way to get it done, basically.
So you started, we're talking 1970s, you're at Marquette, and you always credited one person for having a huge influence on your career that you chose. Take us back to your junior year at Marquette. You were the first female sports editor of the student newspaper, and you're covering the basketball team coached by the legendary Al McGuire. What was it like for you that year? How nervous were you about being a woman on the beat?
I'm be honest, and I'm not the only Marquette person to tell you this, but I really went to Marquette to be part of that scene. And it's very difficult. If you didn't know Al at all, it's hard to explain to, especially kids nowadays, what he was like, because the atmosphere I would compare to Duke, just totally crazy. Crazy is the key word because, but Krzyzewski was a pretty regular guy, kind of maybe even a kind of a straight-laced game. Al was not. It was kind of this carnival, and I just wanted to be part of it. And I was not the cheerleader type, and so I thought I could write about it. I always, as a kid, liked reading, liked writing, so I thought, okay, I'm going to try this. And it didn't occur to me at the time there were well, first of all, I wasn't a woman. I was like 16, 17 when I was in high school thinking about this. Mm-hmm. And it did not occur to me there were no women doing it.
Very few.
So I went to him my junior year and said, Coach, I'm going to be covering the team this year. What would you like to do about the locker room? And he's like, what about it? I said, well, do you want me to wait outside? He said, just come in with everybody else.
Really?
Okay, then. Yeah. And, I tell people, if he had thrown a hissy fit and said, oh, no, that's not happening, I would I would not be where I am today. I would not have filed a lawsuit to get into the Marquette locker. That was not my nature. And I always tell people I would have been I always say a nurse. I always said a nurse, although I probably would have been a teacher more likely. But anyway, I would not have put up a big stink. So I was a little anxious, but really and truly, people in Cleveland will recognize the name. Kevin Byrne was the sports information director at Marquette. Later,
went on to be
with the Browns and Big Dog with the Ravens and throughout the NBA. Very, very good friend of mine. And everyone was very cool about the other sports writers who probably at that point, if I was 19, maybe 20, could have been my father. So everybody, I didn't really have one issue doing it.
That year on the beat. Right.
Yeah. And players, we were students together. So you knew some of them from classes and actually went to class and things. And they would, here was the problem covering Marquette. So the locker room was divided into 3 parts: the actual lockers, the shower, and then where Al did his interviews, which was in a separate kind of dressing area that they didn't really use to dress. The problem with that was it was covered with mirrors. So while you are listening and looking at Al McGuire, the mirrors look directly into the shower.
Oh,
so that was
a good setup.
a tad awkward. But, people I didn't become a sports writer to see naked men. And
you just wanted to do your job, right? As a young reporter around the Marquette basketball beat.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I did. And the players, I think, and I would say till the day, when I retired, I could have been most of their mothers, but, and I think they respected that. Now, was there some teasing? Like occasionally they would sing to me from the showers, or Al walked me out with his hands over my eyes one time, which, some people might have filed some kind of complaint about that. Everybody just rolled with it. And it was so much fun. Now, they didn't win the championship that year, but they did win. Yeah, they did win when I was a senior, which I take full credit for.
Well, tell us about McGuire. McGuire was a Hall of Fame coach, Naismith Hall of Famer, and he went on to become a TV analyst of note. He had this unique vernacular, great stories. He really helped spread the popularity of college basketball in the late 70s and early 80s and onward through his work in television. That's where some people might remember him. Right. He was also a hell of a coach. What was he like as a person to be around on a day-to-day basis when you were covering that team as a junior in college?
He was great. You never knew if he'd be at practice. He often didn't do practice. Hank Raymond and Rick Majerus were the 2 guys who would really run practice.
They were the X and O guys, right?
Right. And Al was known for not remembering anyone's name. And so, for instance, I overheard him call Kevin Byrne once, and he said, Kevin, the big guy. And Kevin's like, Jerome Whitehead? No, the skinny white, big guy, Bo Ellis. He could not remember Bo Ellis's name.
He's just an all-American, that's all right.
Yeah, whatever. And he probably did things that would get him fired today, as far as pulling jerseys, or there's a long, the kid who covers young man who covers I almost said it, the Golden Eagles today.
Gotcha.
So you know where I stand on that. But did a huge story recently. Bernard Toone died over the summer, and he did a huge story on what is part of Marquette folklore about Al slapping Bernard Toone in the locker room before they won the championship. Not at the championship, but in an earlier round, which is a true story. And he was very diligent, did a lot of interviews, and pretty much everyone said, yeah, that would get you fired today. So he was very hot Irish temper.
New York guy.
He was a showman before, he was kind of, what's the Villanova coach? Jay, the slick dresser.
Jay Wright.
Him, yeah. He was Jay Wright before Jay Wright, and carnations, and he famously, when in a Marquette game beat Wisconsin, and he jumped up at the scorer's table, and Wisconsin had Kim and Carrie Hughes, twins, and there's a famous picture in the Sentinel, the morning paper, of it looked like the Hughes father shaking his fist at Al, and in the Journal ran the full picture, which was the Hughes father giving Al the finger. Oh. So that was another famous...
Times were different. You could just run that photo.
I'm pretty sure if I'm not mistaken, I think they ran them both ways. So, but he was just such a showman. But where he excelled was personal contact with players, knowing what made each player tick. Hank could get him in the right position. Hank could get him guarding the right guys. But Al knew what to say or how to challenge him. And so he was all about, and then he was just fun. Like after I got out of school and I was working for the Journal, like he had a big race every year to raise money for Children's Hospital in Milwaukee. And so every year we'd talk to him and he would call you up. And he said, he'd always meet you at some dive. It could be a dive Mexican restaurant. It could be a dive breakfast place. But you didn't negotiate this.
No, it was all
He
out.
told you when he was going to be there.
Yes.
And then you would go there. So he was just a lot of fun. And,
he was quite a character. I mean, when you think about it, he had such an influence on you. You know, I mean, because he was welcoming to the idea of you being around on the beat, treating you with respect as a reporter, a young reporter trying to get into the business, that really seemed to convince you that, this is something I do want to do and pursue. And
he just rolled with it. I mean,
Yes.
it was just wacky enough that he would be like, oh yeah, we're on this. We got this. I don't think if I'd been trying to do it at Notre Dame, I don't think it probably would have gone over quite as well. But
right. It's funny how one individual can have such an influence on a young journalist trying to think about what they want to do with their career. It's pretty cool. Well, late in his life, McGuire had this habit. He would collect tin and metal toy soldiers, and he would sometimes sign them and send them off to people. And I know he died in 2001 in January of that year. And a few months before that, when he was dying, he was ill, you were covering a Cavs game at the arena in downtown Cleveland, and a package arrived for you, right? Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, it was, given what I told you previously about how he never remembered anybody's name, this made me cry. So the PR guy for the Cavs at the time was Ed Markey, who had worked with Al at NBC. And I believe Ed had gone to see Al, when it was clear he was going to pass away. And so he came back into the press room and called me out into the hall, and he said, hold out your hands. So I just, put my hands out, and he put this little cloud of tissue paper in my hands, little white tissue paper, and he said, go ahead, open it. And so inside the little tissue paper cloud was a tiny, I have her here if you want to see her, but I guess this is not on.
Well, tell us, tell us.
She's about an inch high, a little tin nurse, like a Clara Barton type old-fashioned nurse. And on the side of her skirt, he has signed it. And, it made me cry because, first of all, he really did know who I was. He had clearly read, I had sent him a letter when he went into Hall of Fame and said, if you had not made this so much fun, so easy, I probably, I owe my whole career to you, and otherwise I probably would have been a nurse. So to think that when he was dying, he remembered that story and gave the nurse, I'm still a little speechless about the whole thing. There's not a lot of personal things that happen to you during a career. But there's not much will top that. She goes with me to, if I speak at Marquette, I always take her along, and I reluctantly will pass her around the room, afraid someone's not going to give it back. But anyway, so that was, I know it became a little bit of a USA Today, I think, did a story on it at the time. And it was very, very touching. And she really is one of my prized possessions.
Well, Mary, you didn't become a nurse. You became a sports writer. A damn good one at that. And you did it at a time starting in the late 70s when there just weren't many female sports writers. And we touched on this a little bit, but when you think back on your early days as a professional in the business, what was it like being a woman breaking into pretty much mostly a bunch of white guys in the media?
Right.
What was it like for you at that time?
Right. I'm going to be honest. I would say they were pretty, almost to a man, pretty welcoming. I don't really recall any incident. Certainly, let me say to my face that anybody did anything. I think, again, many of them maybe saw their daughters in me that, well, if my daughter wanted to do this, and there were just enough at that point. So I graduated in 1977. So there were Leslie Visser, I believe, was working. Tracy Dodds was here in Milwaukee. So there were just enough women around that it wasn't, you weren't the only, many, many times I was the only woman at a press table, in a press room.
Was that difficult for you?
I'm going to say no, because usually you traveled with there was at least one other beat writer, and there would be like your PR person. So you had colleagues, you had friends that were in there with you.
Right.
I guess you just got so used to it. You kind of didn't. I'll tell you what you noticed was when there started being more women. There's another, and and by and large, then women were so happy to see another woman that you introduce yourself and in 1987 we actually began an organization called the Association for Women in Sports Media, which I'm sure Chris Brennan talked to you about. To form kind of a sorority of sorts, a professional association that exists to this day, has funded a lot of scholarships for young women coming in. Rachel Alexander was one of our early scholarship recipients.
So there's a whole support group, and it grew.
Correct.
And you were on the front lines of that,
Yeah, I guess you got just used to it being that way. In a newspaper office, you were usually the only woman. I never really swore.
What about the coaches and athletes themselves? How did they treat you?
Again, I would say if you act professionally, if you dressed professionally, I think they treated you as such. And I don't remember, I remember, and this was not that young, I covered Chris Mullen would not get dressed once in a locker room. We were having like a standoff. I was waiting for it, put a towel on, whatever. He wouldn't do it. So I was like, okay, I'm on deadline. I'm tucking you naked. You win. I didn't say that, but that was in the 90s. That was, I'd been doing it 15 years by that point. And that's the only really standoff. We've all had run-ins with athletes, but I never had one because I was a woman. I got something wrong, asked a question wrong. I had a New York Yankee player who I can't even remember now. Someone else had covered first base on a play. I thought it was him, and so he was screaming at me, but because I made a mistake, not because I was a woman. And we've all had that,
Yeah, that was part of the gig, right? Yeah.
Very, very rarely was it an actual issue. And I kind of guess, like I say, I was the only woman in almost every sports department I worked in. And you kind of just got used to how they worked and talked. And
you mentioned the Association for Women in Sports Media. In 2008, they gave you the Mary Garber Pioneer Award. You were a real pioneer. Think about it, for the work that you did.
Statue to prove it. Yeah, she was a treat. She came when I was the president of the organization. I was working in Minneapolis, and she came to our convention. And at the time, she was seriously 85, 86 years old, and she'd worked in Florida, I believe, her whole career. And oh my God! Now she had stories, but when she started, she would very much be like the player mother, like they treated her like her grandmother. She had some stories, but and if you can imagine doing it in the South, she was a white woman, so she had that going for her. But you know, she had some good stories about being the only, and she didn't mind it. She.
Right. But do you take some pride in the fact that you were part of that generation that did make a difference in the sports media business?
I do, and to be honest, I don't think young women today have any idea that there was a time when they did. We have a terrific sideline reporter for the Brewers, Sophia Minter, and she actually is also a Marquette graduate. But she's great. She's bilingual, so she can interview players in Spanish and then translate her own answer, basically, her own question and
That's
answer.
Tremendous.
I'm shocked that she's still here as long as she's been here. I figured she'd be gone like that. But, I just don't think they totally appreciate others who paved the way. I think they're not even really conscious that there was a time.
They know what they know. Yeah, they know what they know, which is right now. Right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Well, it was certainly different when you got into business and you did make a difference. You and the other female journalist who, dared to go into the world of sports, the macho world of sports, and take on, a difficult chore and do it in a professional manner and earn your way in with, earn respect, right?
Yeah, I have to say it got easier as I got older. Because I would say, and I think a lot of writers, men and women, would say that they were kind of shy, and writing was a way to get your thoughts known, your feeling it rather than speaking them. And but as I got older, I would not lash out, but I would speak them. I would call guys on things. Let's just pick out Kyrie Irving just because.
Yeah, I was going to say, give us an example of speaking out and putting somebody in the right place. Mr. Kyrie Irving, what happened here?
Mr. Kyrie Irving, probably the less I personally say about him, the better. So, but I will give you this example.
Oh, come on now.
I found him the most difficult athlete I've ever, and I dealt with Leitner. Who else? He was just, I could not. I had a great relationship with his agent. I had a great relationship with his dad. The kid had nothing to do with me. And I see now that's pretty much it. It wasn't me. Trying to think when Mike Brown got fired. I thought it was Mike Brown who was in trouble. Mm-hmm. And we were asking players, what they thought about who the coach, if the coach was going to get fired or whatever. And Kyrie said, that's not any of my business. And I said, I beg to differ. You're the captain of the team. You represent the feelings of the team. I think it is your business. And
right.
He wasn't buying any of it. And he definitely didn't like being called out to suggest he should have an opinion on this. Or I'm trying to think of other players.
Did it get heated between the two of you?
No, I mean, not really. Because neither one of us was going to get to a screaming argument. I'm sure you saw, and your other people have talked about the changing of the media where, we used to go after practice and players would come out and kind of, shoot the shit basically, just
right.
chat.
Right.
But it got outlawed kind of, where you told the PR people who was going to be available. You told them who you wanted to talk to, and then they would tell you who was available. And they selected
right.
people, and it was very
much more controlled. Right.
Much more controlled and forced interaction. Because you had no relationship with a player. And prior to the private planes, you'd be flying, not coach necessarily, but you'd be in airports, sitting in lounges, waiting for your planes.
You could have some small talk. You could develop
right.
a working relationship with somebody.
Right. And they saw you were just a regular person. You weren't, you weren't a National Enquirer, filming
right.
something through the curtains kind of thing. And so that was so much easier because, but they want to limit any interaction. Of course, with the advent of Twitter and everything else, Instagram, any little thing they say can turn out to be a problem. So
it's
the
a much
media
different
changed.
Environment.
Right. And that took away a lot of the fun. Like I remember when I covered the Timberwolves, we were stuck in a plane on the tarmac in Minneapolis. I'm going to say like 6 hours because literally we could have flown to Europe in the time we sat on this plane. And Sam Mitchell was a player at the Timberwolves. And I believe he was threatening to take hostages. And we weren't sure he was kidding. But stuff like that, that never happened anymore. It was...
Right. Different world that way.
Yeah.
Right.
Hi, listeners. We wanted to take a moment to tell you about another podcast from Evergreen Podcasts and Sound Talent Media called Pit Lane Parlay. Pit Lane Parlay is the go-to podcast for IndyCar and motorsports-related news. Each episode, we discuss things like our favorite drivers, news clips from the last week, and generally giving each other a hard time about predictions we've made in the past and or life stories that have come up recently. We really have a lot of fun with it and really enjoy each other's company, and we hope you can come join us too. Join Pit Lane Parlay by following us on your favorite podcast today.
Well, you mentioned Europe, and you mentioned earlier about being able to travel the world and going to Europe and different places as a sports writer. Before we talk some more NBA, I wanted to ask you about the Olympics in particular. We covered a few together. So when you think about your experiences in the Olympics, what comes to mind?
Oh, God. Muhammad Ali lighting the torch in Atlanta. I was sitting with my good friend, Don Burke, he was with Newark, I believe, at the time. And, everybody had been rumored. And as he approached it, you weren't quite sure he was going to, and everyone clapped. I mean, it was the most amazing thing I have ever seen.
Why?
I can still,
what was it about that moment that got you?
I was a big Ali fan to begin with, just because of how he conducted himself. He was, unlike most athletes of the time, he was a political figure and made his opinions known. And he was really smart and really funny. And I was just a big fan of how I actually stood in line. The Super Bowl was in Minnesota in 1992. And he was signing autographs. And I actually stood in line to get his autograph. I was just a big fan. And so just watching him, he did climb the steps, right? He climbed the steps to...
I think he came out from behind in the shadows on the platform itself. Yeah.
Anyway, just, his Parkinson's, you weren't sure he could actually live. And just to see him overcome his physical liabilities to do this unbelievably symbolic gesture, and the reaction that he got from the crowd when the crowd realized it was, that was probably my number one sports moment. It was just fantastic. Everyone clapped. Everyone stood up. It was unbelievable, basically.
That was in Atlanta, Georgia. When you think about your overseas experiences with the Olympics, or anything stand out more than anything else?
Australia was a place I would never probably have gone on my own. The people could not have been more welcoming. They wanted you to have a good time. It is an unbelievable amount of work. You're going to bed at 2:00 in the morning, and sometimes you're covering something at 8:00. You're covering stuff you have no idea.
Right.
I can't even biathlon. In the snow, we're shooting in the snow. Why would you do that? Why would you lay down and do that? If you're hunting deer, maybe. But anyway, but those people, they work so hard. They get such little recognition. They're thrilled when you come to interview them and you know their name and you know where they're from and you're from there, and oh my God, they're so appreciative. It's so different. You know, we were chatting earlier about Leanne Parsley, the firefighter from Denison.
Yeah, from Granville, Ohio, yes.
Made the Olympics in the skeleton, which is suicide mission.
Oh yeah, that's basically like, let's take a cookie sheet, lie down face first, and go down a mountain on ice. Okay,
but we're
that sounds
wearing
good.
helmets, even though we're going head first.
Oh, that's right. They have helmets on.
Yeah.
And they have life insurance.
A lot of it. But she was a peach. She, you know, not only was she a firefighter, but she was just a wonderful human being. And she was selected to carry, that was the Olympics after 9/11.
Right.
And she was one of those athletes selected to carry in the flag from the tattered flag from 9/11. That was also incredibly moving and silent, as opposed to Ali, which was riotous, roaring,
Right.
Applause. That was silent.
Yeah, I remember. I was sitting
stadium.
there. And you could hear the helicopter blades above the stadium. It was like so solemn.
It was
It just moved you in such a different way. You know,
Correct.
It was just like, oh my gosh, that's the flag that was on the North Tower.
Yeah, and I mean, she's a firefighter. That was another very, very moving moment. And I don't know if it's because you're American, this is an American team you're covering. The Olympics just felt a little different inside, kind of, and again, you never root for who's going to win or lose, basically, but
Right.
that was really, really, I loved covering the Olympics. I loved all the work. I didn't mind it at all.
Well, let's talk some NBA before we wrap things up, because you spent, over 20 years covering the NBA, and you touched on it a little bit. We talked some Kyrie and some travel. And when you think about your tenure as a basketball writer, how did the league change over the years? What was it like when you first started covering the NBA as a writer?
Let's see, my first NBA. In Milwaukee, I had done some sidebarring of the Bucks. I did two stories that got a lot of attention. One was the headline was a fine wine. It was about whining in the NBA. And
Whining, yes.
Took a poll, and no surprise, Bill Lanier was the number one whiner. And not a lot of players filled out the little surveys that I put together. But there were enough great ones, and it just wrote the story. And then the other story I did that got a lot of attention back then was Julius Erving was retiring. And one of my colleagues at the Journal was doing a story on how the size of his hands impacted what he could do with the ball, which makes perfect sense. But they sent me, I was doing a general story on him because the Bucks always thought they had the rights to him, the NBA rights to him. Long story involving Wayne Embry. So I went to do that story. And then while I was there, they said, oh yeah, and we need you to trace his hand. I'm like,
Dr. J's hand?
Yeah, like, your kid makes a turkey, a Thanksgiving turkey.
Yeah, right.
So I went down to Chicago to do this ahead of him coming to Milwaukee. And I was last person. He, as usual, very cordial, listen to all your questions, nice, thoughtful answers. And I pull out a piece of paper and I said, and now I have to ask you, could I trace your hand? And so he gave me a look like, you cannot be serious. And then he had a look on his face like, all right, I've done all kinds of other crazy stuff this year. I might as well. So he puts down his hand and I trace his hand. I'm super embarrassed and I leave. So I bring it back. I'm very proud of myself because that was above and beyond in my opinion. I bring it back and the person, maybe it was the editor, said, well, you traced it wrong.
What?
Look at his finger. His index finger was like bent. He said, you traced it wrong. I said, no, his index finger is bent. And they were like arguing with me. So I had to do enough research to find when he'd broken his finger and how it had never healed. But then they ran it in the paper full size. My hand didn't even fit in his palm, basically.
Wow.
But my first beat experience was in Minnesota with the Timberwolves, the start of the Timberwolves. Bill Musselman was the coach. Again, Sam Mitchell was on that team. Sidney Lowe was on that team. Scotty Brooks came later. And much of that team had been Musselman's team in the ABA. No, not ABA. What was the precursor to the NBA minor league? I can't think of the name.
The minor
they were
league
in
team?
Albany. I can't remember. The minor league, NBA league, whatever it was called. They were with the Albany Patroons. So these were guys who were just happy to be in the NBA. So they didn't care if a horse was covering them. They're getting NBA salaries and NBA per diem, and so they had no problem at all. They were great to cover, and Musselman was totally nuts, but easy to cover.
Wait a minute, totally nuts. Give us a nuts Bill Musselman story.
Let me think. He used to run this like suicide drill at practice. He'd pick guys out to play one-on-one, like to the death, basically, while everyone sat around watching. And let's see, what was his crazy, crazy stuff, though? He was constantly, he's a coach. He wants to win. But at that, you're expansion team and you're supposed to be accumulating draft choices. And so he's getting all this pressure from above. The GM was Bob Stein, who was the son-in-law of the owner. Was kind of
a little complicated.
And he just couldn't bring himself to not try to win the game. And I think
lay off the gas, they're telling you.
There was a game. So Pooh Richardson was their number one pick, and Pooh was not playing very well. So Scotty Brooks had played the majority of the second half, and he was on one of those tears that Steph Curry would get on, where the ball, he could throw the ball from his ankles and it was going in. I mean, he was just on one of those tears. Final 2-3 minutes, he takes out Scott Brooks, puts in Pooh, and they lose. So after the game, I said, I think maybe you should have left Scott Brooks in there. And see, I got bolder with my questions as I got older. And he's like, well, Mary, we're an expansion team. The whole party line, right? On the bus, and that was the day you could ride the bus, like from the arena to the hotels or to the airport, whatever. He gets on the bus, he leans over and he says, Mary, you were right. I should have played Scotty. So, they don't admit it. But he was just so, I can't.
He was a character. And in the NBA, you had quite a few characters. When I think about your years in Cleveland, and we'll talk LeBron before we finish, but you had some different people. I mean, you had Ricky Davis, Sean Kemp. You had Shaq for a year. you had quite a few characters coming through Cleveland in those days. The coaches, John Lucas, the owner, Dan Gilbert. I mean, who's your favorite character?
Oh, wow. Favorite character. He wasn't a character, but my favorite player was Z, just because he was such a great human being. I would always tell people, if my car ran out of gas on Lake Road, I would call Z, and I know he would come and get me. That's the kind of guy. If he was not 7'3", he would have been a teacher or something, or a coach. A character, though. I was Clarence Weatherspoon. I never totally quite got. And you were always a little afraid in the locker room he might go off on you for any unknown reason, wearing a green sweater or something. I'm sure there's. I think I went a year without interviewing Lamont Murray. I didn't get him either.
A whole year without just talking to him? Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah. That was very professional. I just thought he didn't bring anything, and there's no point in talking to him.
No reason to talk to this guy. Yeah. He's not bringing anything to the table.
Character, though.
Sean Kemp, I remember showing up when I was in Columbus, and I showed up in the late 90s up to Cleveland one night. Sean Kemp had just joined the team, and I walked in. I'm like, this guy's like 400 pounds. That's like...
Yeah. My husband had just moved to Cleveland from Seattle. And when I got the call that the Brewers Brewers, that the Cavs were going to trade for Sean Kemp. Gene was like, no, don't do it.
Well, they traded for the Goodyear blimp. That's what happened.
Oh my God, that was such a, that was a disaster. And that was ownership clamoring for Fratello and his staff had put together kind of a list of superstars. I think they thought were going to be available. So, Michael Jordan was not on there, and Sean Kemp was at the top of their list, and Wayne was kind of ordered to
bring him to town.
Yeah, that didn't work out too well. That was too bad. I was not, Shaq was very pleasant to deal with, surprisingly, to be honest. I am amazed at his staying power. I feel as though, first of all, I thought he used to pimp us because he practically whispers in the locker room. And I was always the shortest at the back of the pack. I could never hear what he's saying. Because you'd pass your tape recorders up.
Right.
So people in front could hold them for you. But I'm amazed at his staying power. Like, I love the TNT broadcast, but I feel like the ball is zipping back and forth, and then when it gets to Shaq, it just stops. Like, he holds it. And the commercial, I turn my television on, he's doing commercial for Cousins or something. I mean, Subway. I don't know. I'm amazed at his staying power. But God bless him. He was pleasant, very pleasant to deal with.
Well, all these years of covering the NBA, there's one player we obviously want to hit on, and that's LeBron James.
Who could that be?
LeBron James. And
the man.
You were in Cleveland covering those Cavs for 20 years. You were covering the Cavs before LeBron, covering the Cavs when LeBron comes to town, when he leaves town, when he comes back. What
covered the 26-game losing streak when he was gone.
That's right. Think about that. How many games?
26, I believe.
So when you think about your tenure in Cleveland, what was it like to cover LeBron James as a writer?
I'm going to say flat out, which I say, I really liked LeBron. I'm very proud of the person LeBron. I should qualify. I don't really know. I don't know him away from the court at all. Mm-hmm. I'm proud of the person he's become. I'm proud of the fact that he will take a stand on certain important
social justice
topics.
Issues,
yes.
Right?
I'm extremely proud of the loyalty he has to his hometown, with the school that he started. His commitment to Akron is real. I mean, and I applaud him for that. So he wasn't always, as a young player, certainly he was not always the easiest to deal with. I did think the Cavs did him a disservice, and all of us a disservice, by the Cavs did not lay down the rules. They pretty much let LeBron lay down the rules, i.e., he would not come out and speak. You had to speak to him in the locker room with 50 people around, and that was just ridiculous. It was disrespectful to the players on both sides of them. They'd come out and get their clothes out of their lockers and go in the shower.
It was just crazy, right?
And so, I thought LeBron would have been better served had the Cavs been, Paul Silas was his first coach. And in a lot of ways, that was a great coach because physically he could, he commanded respect. And that was good for LeBron, I think. But as a whole, the organization, I thought, could have, instead of him, running the show as an 18-year-old, I think, but in the end, I mean, now I think he's kind of a father figure almost. He's obviously one of the greatest players of all time. I quantify because people who saw Oscar Robertson will always say Oscar Robertson was the greatest player of all time.
Right.
So different eras, different players, or Jordan.
Well, you saw so many players. When he was a young player, did you feel like he was going to become what he was hyped to be?
There were days where you were like, bro, yeah. I mean, first couple of years, no. Really, I mean, how could you? Jordan was still at a peak then. The one thing I always thought Jordan had over LeBron is that Jordan would run his mother over to score. LeBron wanted people to like him. I remember if it was for his first All-Star games and stuff, he brought like gifts for the other players, like party favors. And I thought that was so sweet. But yeah, the look on your face. It was very sweet. I don't remember what they were, something, but it was, he wanted people like him, and which is not a bad trait. I just thought Jordan's competitive streak made him greater at the time. Now, you can't deny anything LeBron's done, how hard he's worked. Again, I personally always got along with him fine.
Did he treat you with respect?
Yeah, he did. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, but by then, what are we talking, 2003, there, a lot of women on TV by that time. And so it wasn't a novelty. And actually, I could have been his grandmother, basically, almost. So, and he went to a good Catholic school, so respected his elder. I did always get along with him, and he lived up to the hype. I wasn't sure I never thought I didn't see it initially. I saw him in high school like you did, and you think he's great, but, you think other players are going to be great, and,
Right. Not all-time great. Right?
No, right.
LeBron leaves and goes to Miami, and he wins a championship. But he comes back. It's the redemption story. He comes back home. What's your story about LeBron coming home?
I know that was hard for him because he didn't care for the owner. He didn't have a close relationship with the owner. But Dan Gilbert, do,
right?
Correct. I do think that it still showed his commitment to Northeast Ohio. Here's what I remember is him on his hands and knees crying after that was all over, because he'd done what he promised, even though it was so improbable against the team that they beat. That to me was the lasting impression of what he'd personally gone through to deliver on the promise that he made. And I respect him for that. I was not covering the team anymore.
Right.
But watching on TV in my little Avon Lake house, I thought that was a tribute to LeBron, frankly.
How are you going to remember LeBron from your time as a journalist and now that you're out of the business? When you think about LeBron, what do you think about?
I like LeBron. I always did. Again, I'm very proud of the person he's grown up to be. After a very difficult upbringing, I remember him as a dad. It was in the playoffs. We were all in the interview room in the playoffs. And he's carrying LeBron Jr. out, who's wailing as a 2-year-old can wail, just wailing.
You're right.
And I happened to be standing as they walked past, and he was patting him out. He was holding him, and he was patting him on the back, and he said, "It's not that bad, my man. It's not that bad." And I kind of, my own personal snapshot of him is that. And because, he didn't have a dad to do that. He didn't. Right. His dad didn't do that to him. So I remember him fondly. He still gives me some street cred if I'm talking to classes because, pretty soon there'll be no players in the NBA I covered. So I still have a little street cred by saying I covered LeBron. And I did discover recently, or I realized that I am the only beat writer in America to cover Al McGuire and LeBron.
There you go.
How about that? I could put that on my tombstone.
There you go. Well, that's a good bookend for not only your career, but our episode, And Mary, I got to tell you, I'm so glad that Al McGuire and your experience with Al McGuire convinced you to be a sports writer, because you were a damn good one for many years. You were always somebody that I could count on when I was in the press room and needed a calming voice Mary would always talk me off the ledge. And
I was
really,
usually probably giving up my seat.
yeah, right. No, you always had a good wisdom to you, and you were such an inspiration to many other women in the media. And I'm so glad that we've had a chance to talk about the great moments in your career. It's been a real honor to have you with us, and I really appreciate that. And I miss the time that we had together as colleagues.
That's what I miss, is the sort of the downtime in the press room and just laughing and telling stories and listening to Bob Finan complain about something. And yeah, that's
not
what
just
I miss.
Bob. Let's be fair, not just Bob.
True.
We're all complainers.
Yeah, that's true too.
Well, Mary, thanks again.
Thank you so much for asking me. I'm really honored that you did.
Thanks for listening to Press Box Access. You can find us here with a new episode every other Wednesday. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe and follow us on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast app. We'd love for you to review us. 5 stars would be nice. Follow us on social media. Drop us an email at pressboxaccess@gmail.com. And be sure to spread the word. Everyone is welcome here. This has been a production of Evergreen Podcast. A special thank you to executive producers Michael D'Aloia and Gerardo Orlando, producer Bill Huffman, and our audio engineer Nathan Corson. I'm your host, Todd Jones. It's closing time. Rock on.
Hi, listeners. We wanted to take a moment to tell you about another podcast from Evergreen Podcasts and Sound Talent Media called Pit Lane Parlay. Pit Lane Parlay is the go-to podcast for IndyCar and motorsports-related news. Each episode, we discuss things like our favorite drivers, news clips from the last week, and generally giving each other a hard time about predictions we've made in the past and or life stories that have come up recently. We really have a lot of fun with it and really enjoy each other's company, and we hope you can come join us too. Join Pit Lane Parlay by following us on your favorite podcast today.